Hey, welcome back to Gecko Cove. My name is Bobby, and today I'm going to be going over part 2 of my breeder series. In part 1, we talked about actually getting the breeders. How old do they have to be? How big do they have to be? Are they in good enough health to actually produce viable eggs? And if you haven't seen that episode, I'm going to link it right here. Go watch it before you come back and watch this episode. You need healthy breeders before you even move on. So today we are going to be going over, now that you have healthy breeders, how do you put them together so that they are going to go do their magic and make some eggs for you? If that sounds interesting to you, you're in the right place. Welcome to Gecko Cove. All right, so how do breeders typically put their gargoyle geckos together to successfully create some eggs? Well, there are 3 main ways that I want to go over today. Those would be, you can either put them in one-on-one pairs, you can put them in groups, 3 or more, and you can also go and keep them one-on-one but rotate the male so that one male can impregnate multiple females and you can spread around the genetics that way. Before I really dive into the pros and cons of all 3 systems, I want to just mention that just because I choose to go and breed my geckos in a certain way does not make that the right way of going about breeding gargoyle geckos. Again, everything that we do in this hobby has pros and cons, and as long as you're not neglecting your animals, do whatever works for you. Okay, this is just kind of my take on the pros and cons, what I've seen, what I've learned, and what I'm currently doing. So let's start with one-on-one pairs. It's as simple as it sounds. You take a male, you take a female.
One man, one woman in the bed.
You put them in an enclosure. You watch them for about 24 hours to make sure that they're not going to kill themselves. Now, you don't need to camp out and watch them, nonstop. What I do is I typically will pair them when I'm doing this, when it's kind of in, I would say, late December, January time, when it's a little bit chillier out, so they're a little less active, and the breeding season is just starting. That's ideally the best time to pair one-on-one pairs if you're not going to leave them together all year round. So when you do that, though, I will check on them. I'll usually get up once during the night, make sure that they're not, hurting each other too badly. Sometimes I'll get lucky and see that they're actually getting along swimmingly and they're attached to each other. Let's put it that way.
We did it.
They did it.
And then I go back in the morning and I check on them. I look to see if the female has any scarring or any signs of bites or wear and tear. I also check the male for the same thing. And typically I don't see very much. They're not leeches. They're not going to go and destroy each other in 10 seconds. Now I have heard horror stories, but I've been fortunate enough with my small collection where, they're just as easy as some crested geckos. You put them together, you make sure that they're just okay, and every day or so I'll just make sure that they're getting along swimmingly. Typically, the one-on-one pairs, one of the major pros is that you can leave them together, as long as they're getting along year-round. So you never have to separate them. A lot of the major breeders, if you watch my podcast, they'll tell me that, when you put geckos together for the first time, when they're doing the introduction, that's the scary time. That's when things can go a little bit crazy.
Danger zone!
And that's when, some challenges where they tear each other apart can happen. Not that it can't happen randomly at any point, but that's the kind of like most critical time for them to see if they're compatible and get along. And what I find is that, most geckos do get along. The 2 scenarios where what I've seen is either that they bond and, they're not going to pair bond like a Chewy, but they do tolerate each other. And I've seen geckos that get along better hang out together, and they'll kind of occupy the same area of the tank, especially after, they get used to each other and they understand each other's scent, things like that. The other side of the coin is the unsuccessful pairings are typically, when I first started, I put in a male in that was, I didn't take my own advice, was too small for a female. Luckily, the female didn't destroy him. Basically, the male just kind of went in the corner and was scared, right? It was very inexperienced. It was a first-year breeder, And so if you see them always separated, always hiding from each other,
Keep her away from me.
that could just be a sign that it's not, the right time to pair these geckos. But, maybe give it a little bit more time, and I've seen geckos come around as long as you know that they're within 10 grams of each other. And, if it's a new male, give it a little bit of time. It doesn't know what it's doing. But if it's an experienced male being bullied, definitely pull it and make sure it doesn't lose any weight. So to recap, one-on-one, basically the pros are it's easier. It's less thinking about anything. You just put them together. You keep them together. It's a little bit safer because there's less chance, as long as they have enough hiding spaces, less chance of aggression, of female-on-female aggression or food aggression, especially if you set up the enclosure the right way. And also, you can keep them together year-round, so anytime that you don't have to reintroduce animals, that, again, is kind of that red danger zone.
Danger zone.
For the first few days after you pair the animals, and you're basically doing that once and avoiding it for the rest of the time that those two geckos are together. The downside is that the male's genetics can only go to that one female, right? Females can only, get paired with one male. So that's why a lot of people invest in a really high-end male and want to spread those genetics around. And that leads me to the second way, and really the third way, of keeping your gargoyle geckos and breeding them. So if you're ready to breed and you have a killer male, you've invested a lot of money, and you want to spread his genetics far and wide to all of your females, then clearly one-on-one is not going to work for you. So I'm in that predicament right now because I have one gorgeous striped male, and I want to go and give his genetics to as many females right now because I don't have a lot of males that are ready to breed, and that's Prowlin. Prowlin would be great with a one-on-one with Hawaii, but what I am doing, and the second way of going about it, is rotating your males. Now, I've got to give credit to Jake from Red Rack. This is the style that he has in his breeder video that I watched probably 1,000 times. He goes over that in great detail, and I'll sort of recap it here. But if you haven't seen that video, go check it out in the link below. And again, you'll just get a double dose of this style. I believe he gives credit to Grizzly Geckos, if I'm not mistaken, who taught him how to do this as well. But basically, the idea is that you take a male and you want to, about a week or so after a female has laid her last clutch. So you want to give her some time to recover. Then you're going to go and introduce the male, do all the same things that I told you to do when you're pairing them initially one-on-one. But then what you're going to do is let them just hang out and be together until you see a lock, or some people, wait about a week. Some people wait 2 weeks, depending on how many females you want to get that male to have some fun with. You want to make sure that you are going and giving them time to actually get the deed done, and then you pull that male, and depending on how well he's doing, if he's losing weight because all he thought about was breeding with that female, or it was sort of a rough breeding.
That was rough.
Then we're going to go and give that male a break in his own enclosure, let him recuperate, and then, look for the next female to pair him to. Now, the pro is that you get to spread his genetics far and wide, as many females as you have, which is a huge pro. The downside to that is that some males, not all, I would say younger males have this issue more often than older experienced males. They have a one-track mind. They want to go and do their job, and they do it well. But that means that they're also not thinking about food. So some of them can drop weight and get really unhealthy if we just pop them in one after another to each female. It's stressful going into a new enclosure, new smells, new environment, and then he's got to perform on top of all of that.
I can't perform under pressure.
So giving him a break in between can be very helpful. What I actually found when I put him in by himself in his own enclosure, Prowlin here, he didn't recover very well. But for some reason, when I put him in with Hawaii, he gains a ton of weight. I don't know what it is. It's sort of his home base, so that works for me. But I will rotate Prowlin in with different females for about a week, typically after each time that they lay. Luckily, my females are not all synced up with their cycles. So they're all about a week or two apart for laying eggs, the 3 females that I have him going with right now. Actually, it's 4 now. And so he's pretty much got a home every week. And then he goes and hangs out with Hawaii. But with that model, you could potentially miss a breeding, because with 3 or 4 females, and only, if you're keeping them in there a week, and if you have 2 females that are on the same cycle, how do you go and guarantee that he did the job unless you're watching them, which, again, you're not going to see if you've bred geckos at all. You know that you don't see them lock up very often. Okay, they do it at night. They're nocturnal. Most of us are asleep, and they like to have their privacy. So typically I don't see them actually lock up, and so I just trust that it gets done. I usually look for other markers like the breeding biting marks that I talked about a little bit earlier, and I'll show another little clip here of that. And you really want to see, is that something that is happening? But basically, the con is that you could get some duds. You could get some, luckily they do retain some sperm. So it's not like, you're guaranteed duds if you don't time it just right. But on the other hand, sometimes you'll get 1 good egg and 1 dud, or, things can happen with gargoyles. So the pros, again, are that you're spreading genetics and that you can use 1 male for multiple females. The con is that it's a lot more work on you. You're going to have to kind of time out the female cycles. You have to pay a lot more attention. You're going to have to, just risk it that maybe you when you paired them, it wasn't the right time. The female wasn't receptive.
Got a headache. I have a headache.
And you might miss, a little bit of a breeding cycle and miss an egg or miss a whole clutch. So that is the con there. The third way of putting together adult gargoyle geckos to breed would be in trios or quads or groups. Now, I haven't seen many breeders go past 4 females. I think that's a little excessive. But with enough space, enough feeding ledges and hides, I guess you could go, relatively large if the male could go and find all the females. But basically, I'm just going to talk about, trios and quads. Those are the most typical ways that you're going to do it. So, if I wanted to put in and had a large enough enclosure where I wanted to put in 2 of my females in the, let's say, the 18-18-24 and put him prowling and not have to think as much as rotating him around to the female enclosures. That is a major pro. You can just put them in together and they will have access to the male all the time, right? Just like one-on-one, that is a major pro. It's more hands-off. So if you have a very large collection, you're one of the huge names in the industry with hundreds of geckos, a lot of those breeders do this style because they can spread around genetics, get that pro. They can also have the pro of being hands-off. But what are the downsides? Why isn't everybody just putting in 4 or 5 geckos into one enclosure and calling it a day, right? So let's talk about what are the downsides of that. And again, it's not the wrong way of doing it. It's great for a lot of breeders. But here's what I've heard so far. Basically, females, okay, are not always friendly with each other. So female on female aggression, especially, you have to have a lot of hides, a lot of visual barriers. And if there is a favorited area, and 2 of them want to go after each other, that could be a problem. There's a lot more lost tails. So if you are a tail nut and want to keep the tails, even if they grow back on gargoyles, but you want to keep your original tail, this is not necessarily the best way of going about it. I accidentally, again, I learned from my mistake. When I was just getting started, I put in Hawaii and Eve in the same enclosure. I was like, oh, I got my very first 18-18-24. They were just under 2 years old. I'm like, all right, I see all the big breeders. I just watched a video and they have groups. So if the big breeders are doing it, why shouldn't I? So I'm like, I don't have the male ready, but I'll put the females, get them ready together. Well, I came back the next morning and Hawaii's tail was gone. Eve had eaten it.
Yum, 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 give it.
So I'm glad it happened that way, not the other way around with Eve's color, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, so, females can do just as much damage to each other as a male and a female can do to each other, even without the breeding. Okay. So that's one challenge, is that the more introductions you have, the more chance that there's personalities, and they do have little personalities, that things can go wrong, right? And that they might fight over resources, or, there's some females that are just known to be tail eaters. So there's that. The other big thing is that a lot of people, if you're just starting out, I was talking to David during our interview, and I asked him, what do you recommend? Because David does do groups, right? And he was like, you're just starting out. You are just making a name for yourself, and lineage is important. People want to know not only, the male, they want to know the female. Now, big breeders with big names can get away with that a little bit. If you've got Deadpool and you're breeding, and that's all you need to say, it's a Deadpool baby. I got quality females. You don't need to tell me what the mom's name is. I just need to know it's a Deadpool baby. Where with me, you want to know who's the mom, who's the dad, right? And for a lot of small hobby breeders like myself, lineage is going to up the value. And if you know not only who the father is, but the mother, I think that there's some real advantage to that, especially when you're trying to sell babies and justify whatever price you're asking for them. So again, to recap, it's got a lot of pros from both previous methods, where you're hands off. You are also getting to spread your genetics around with groups, and it can be a it's a space saver too. I didn't even mention that you're putting them all in one larger enclosure, but typically that's less space than multiple enclosures. So major pros there. The cons: you don't know the lineage. There can be increased aggression if not set up properly, and even when you set it up properly, I've just seen a lot more damage on geckos, lost tails, things like that. And I want to keep my geckos pretty pristine, and I focus on lineage. So that is not a way that I am going to be breeding. So as you can probably guess in this video, how I'm doing it right now is I'm rotating my males. But I also have a set that I actually have a breeder loan where I just am keeping them one-on-one, and it works beautifully. So they are hanging out together. She's getting really plump. They're both virgin animals. And so when I put them together, they're taking a little bit longer to produce. They have not produced so far this year. But I've got Delirium from Southern Girl Exotics with my girl Gaia, and it looks like we're going to have eggs anytime soon. So cross my fingers. Hopefully I look back at this video and laugh and say, I got a ton of eggs this year. But yeah, so I'm kind of dabbling in both of those strategies. If I had my way and I had, let's say I wanted 10 pairs and I had 10 amazing males where I couldn't even distinguish which one was my favorite, with 10 amazing females, then of course I would do one-on-one. But what I'm looking at right now is that next year I will have about 4 amazing males, and I'll have 2 females per male to rotate. So I'm not going to rotate as many females, but I think it's really manageable, and it's going to be my sweet spot to have one male alternate between 2 different locations back and forth. Hopefully that means I won't miss any eggs. Hopefully that means I won't miss any pairings, and it'll be a win-win-win for me. So that is my plan right now. Again, that's what works for me. You've got to listen to this, and there might be another way that you can kind of pair geckos together that I'm not thinking about. If that's the case, put it in the comments down below. But hopefully this was helpful if you're just starting out and you're just thinking about breeding, and you want to know, okay, I've got this many males and this many females. How do I want to go and put them together? Hopefully this episode in my series has helped you out. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about how to set up the enclosure so that when the female is ready to lay her eggs, what are the options for you? Do you do lay boxes? Do you do substrate? Do you do bioactive? The pros and cons with that, as well as going over how to go and collect the eggs and start the incubation process. There's a few different ways of doing that as well. Plenty to talk about. If that interests you, do me a favor, go smash that like button. Make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss a thing. And thank you so much for watching me on Gecko Cove. Hey, if you've enjoyed this video and want to encourage me to make more Gargoyle Gecko content, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, share this with a friend, and maybe check out one of the videos right over there. I'll see you next time on Gecko Cove.